Rock, baby.
Three words that will instantly perk up anybody's ears interested in the hack and slash genre, who enjoy immensely stylish gameplay, and perhaps pizza. In its infancy, having originally been intended to become Resident Evil 3, it instead became one of the biggest names today, under its own label, easily earning its classic status for most people who picked it up and past Phantom. Containing enjoyable gothic scenery, memorable music, and cheesy action from characters involved, Devil May Cry 1 was the brilliant beginning for what everything would soon evolve into. And just before we officially move on, don't make a drinking game out of how many times the game title will be repeated in this video. I don't want to get sued for anybody's alcohol poisoning. Also know that this will absolutely not be a video for everyone, but I figured it could be a fun topic to delve into. In the case of any tangents, a marker for those will also appear on screen. So, with that said, let's begin. Devil May Cry's ensured success naturally led to the development of a second game during localization, a move made to capitalize on the popularity of the first. Devil May Cry 2, however, was rushed, and when you hear the word rushed, it was completed in no more than 6 months. Production of the game was not handed over to Capcom Production Studio 4, the studio behind the first Devil May Cry. No, it was given to Capcom Production Studio 1, the face mostly behind arcade titles at the time, and with little console game development experience. 6 months before the game's release, Hideaki Itsuno was introduced as a replacement for the former director, finding out that nothing had really been done. Allegedly only Stinger, one of Dante's abilities, was completed in this duration. Essentially this meant that Devil May Cry 2 had to be completed and ready to ship in said 6-month period. A mixture of lack of time, lack of experience in developing console games, and having to simultaneously focus on other projects, Capcom Production Studio 1 obviously struggled, but thanks to Hideaki Itsuno's help, the project pulled through. The original developer behind Devil May Cry 2 was never named, but there's still plenty of speculation. There's a lot to dislike about Devil May Cry 2, your pick of videos on YouTube is a testament to such. But is there anything in Devil May Cry 2 that could be considered some kind of redemption, even if just a small amount? These may not be universally agreed upon forms of redemption. In fact, I'm willing to bet many will state against. But let's have a look anyway. Of course, we can point out the obvious here and state that it was the origin of the Bloody Palace, having the option to fight enemies up to 10,000 levels. Bloody Palace continued as an addition in later installations to the series, and Devil May Cry 3 carried over 10,000 floors as well. Eventually, we saw Devil May Cry 4 reduce the amount to 101 floors, which also then carried over to Devil May Cry 5. Here we see the option to go up 1 level, 10 levels, or 100 levels. The higher you go, the more difficult arenas become, with bosses throughout the game making yet another appearance here too. You may not realize which portal represents what level at first, but you'll quickly find out. It's a great place to earn blood points for upgrades, to test out your skills and perfect them, with addition of that feel-good sensation in defeating difficult floors. While not all movement implementations may be considered a win-to-all, they do look slick and feel smooth for the most part. In Devil May Cry 2 we encounter new dodging capabilities. Elements such as running up and along walls were integrated alongside other moves. Going along walls is something I wouldn't have necessarily been opposed to being implemented in later series entries. It's useful and definitely helped me escape some close encounters, just like in DMC3, which held on to running up walls from 2. But it still doesn't relieve classic DMC platforming issues we've all experienced at least a handful of times. Though there is something I'll state here. It arguably has the best platforming in all 3 classic entries of the series. It's almost on par with Devil May Cry 3's, but thanks to having equally smooth mid-jump movements, sans turbo mode, and air high coming unlocked right off the bat, it wins out. There's also something about DMC2's movement that just seems to feel better. In terms of cost for air hike, we see Dante in Devil May Cry 1 needing 4,000 red orbs, and in DMC3 we need 20,000 red orb upgrades for each weapon, in order for it to go above Devil May Cry 2's starter kit. It may go without saying, but Devil May Cry 1's air hike is obviously more restrictive than 2 and 3's, and 3's prices get steep quick. The visual design of Devil May Cry 2 definitely looks the part, areas truly creating the appearance of experiencing an evil demonic takeover. The artistic approach made through color usage really sets the mood atmospherically. Purple and green hues colliding with your standard run-of-the-mill city scenery provides for some decent eye candy. As for enemy design, Plan 2 were, not the best. A few were decent, leaning towards redeemable, such as the first real boss we encounter that emerges from a building, later becoming a disembodied head lusting for the player's death. Being able to attack him from behind and avoiding potential damage is fun. The enemy is well put together and it creeped me out when I was younger. Plus you have Argosax the Chaos, who is essentially a boss rush as a second last enemy, which I personally found interesting in its own simple amalgamated way. And Argosax, who arrives afterward in an interesting fight. Trismagis is a good enemy in theory and design, but not in practice. He takes too long. As a character who often gets shoved to the back of the line, we have Lucia, seen introduced in this entry. I see her as a redeemable portion of the game, despite a certain underwater encounter on her designated disc. The character design for Lucia, generally speaking, looks good, and her abilities mirror Dante's to a large degree, with the exception of throwable daggers instead of using swords. Her cross-distance attacks are similar to Lady in a way. It's really a pity that she got dealt such a bad hand with being involved in one of the most hated entries in the series. She had a decent enough background as we learned from the game, and we only ever saw her get mentioned again in a prequel novel 2 and song name in Devil May Cry 5. Her origins are interesting enough to warrant further inclusion in future game titles, but small nods such as those mentioned, and the dagger stuck in the map on Dante's wall in Devil May Cry 5 is nice. Given that she was developed in only 6 months, I appreciate the work involved in creating her. No pun intended. She really has a lot of potential as a character. It would be nice to see Lucia as a playable character if another Devil May Cry were to ever release, but I'm not holding my breath. Plus, Lucia would have been better received if she wasn't in Devil May Cry 2. For example, everybody I've met loves Lady, who got introduced in 3. Lady is probably my favorite female Devil May Cry character. Folks online love Lady to the point that there are entire sections of online boards dedicated to her getting shafted, but nobody got shafted as hard as Lucia. And Lucia is the only reason I personally return to this game now and then outside of speedruns. Also, you didn't need to enter the menu in order to switch weapons, which was a positive change in the series, and the originating entry for this gameplay/UI edition. I view it as a noteworthy inclusion, and it definitely helped shape further entries as it became a staple for helping Dante and other characters achieve those stylish ranks. While low in health, the player can enter a special type of devil trigger called Maijin trigger, or Desperation trigger. This came back evolved in the form of Sin Devil trigger, known in Devil May Cry 5. Take enough damage, and you earn this ability. What's better than one devil trigger? 2 devil triggers. Its implementation got adjusted for 5, yet this was the game that included anything resembling this devil trigger type. It's a miracle this game even exists given such a short development time frame, despite many arguing that it would have been for the best if it never saw the light of day. As mentioned previously, Itsuno had been brought on board to direct the project with a 4 to 6 month deadline before release, meaning that everything featured was going above and beyond to many degrees. Another positive was the result of alleged complaints in not being able to play as Trish in Devil May Cry 1, and of course this could absolutely be nothing more than rumor. Nevertheless, she's playable in Devil May Cry 2 with all of Devil May Cry 1's Dante's abilities. Ultimately, it's a great addition. This tradition of multiple playable characters continued through other titles within the franchise, even if they sometimes happen to be DLC content or buggy, at least in their PC ports from experience. Cutscenes created for Devil May Cry 2 were quite high quality. They're impressive and they look actually really pretty. Again, this is an arguable redeeming factor, as even the worst games can have great looking cutscenes, but still be awful. The targeting system in Devil May Cry 2 is capable of focusing on 2 targets at once, a clear step up from Devil May Cry 1's sole targeting system. For the most part, the player will be making short work of one enemy at a time, yet the inclusion of shooting a target in the face behind the character is fun in and of itself. Not only that, but staggers enemies so that you can escape injury and maintain style ranking. For those who enjoy the occult, there's some rather obvious links, such as the Tree of Life hidden in plain sight in at least one cutscene. Thanks to Devil May Cry 5, we could theorize at referencing the Clifoth. The Arcana, a reference to the Tarot's minor arcana, is symbolized through the items necessary for Arias to invoke Argosax. This was in no way exhaustive, as I'm sure there are more redeemable qualities buried in there. Some maybe sound effects getting reused, maybe, and even some memes that came around. All in all, is Devil May Cry 2 as bad as we think? In my honest opinion, no, not really. Is it mediocre for what we've come to know from Devil May Cry? Yes, I think there was a lot of potential that went wasted, partially due to lack of time allowance to develop something far greater, especially from a studio that predominantly made arcade games. Yet, for what it's worth, a game created in 4 months to half a year could have gone so much worse. And we still saw great pieces of content inside Devil May Cry 2 that is a staple in Devil May Cry's modern releases. Sadly, this tends to get overshadowed because of its unfortunate legacy left behind. It's pretty understandable to look back and state how much you hate Devil May Cry 2. That's practically a bonding method at this point. Nevertheless, whether you hate it or fall into the love it or tolerate it camps, there are some things to genuinely enjoy that came out of Devil May Cry 2. I'm in the section that doesn't mind it, but just kind of finds it boring for half, while another is sort of interesting. If you haven't played Devil May Cry 2, at least try it. Completing it might give you a newfound love for the rest of the series, at worst if you don't enjoy it. Anyway, I'll nip this tangent here. Thanks for watching or listening, and have a good one.
Till next time, son of Sparta.